The 10 o'clock news now on BBC One Wales with Darren Jordan and Jamie Owen.
A terror suspect tells the Old Bailey he was happy when Al-Qaeda attacked America on September the 11th. Omar Khayyam told the jury how he travelled to Pakistan, where he was trained in guerrilla tactics. He's the first defendant to take the stand in the alleged fertiliser bomb plot. Also tonight, is time running out? Experts say we only have 4 years left to start reducing carbon emissions.
We're running out of time, basically. We need to start making cuts, and substantial cuts, as soon as possible.
You know the numbers, you know the urgency, and you know how bad this is likely to get.
A worldwide superstar lends his voice to calls for action over Darfur. Britain's biggest insurance company cuts 4,000 jobs and moves some of them to India. And is it art, social comment, or plain vandalism? The elephant in the room by the British urban artist in America.
In Wales today, after shocking images of school children fighting get onto the internet, tonight there are calls to ban sites. And cashback for small businesses, why some will have their rates cut by half.
Good evening. He grew up in a typical English town. He was captain of his school cricket team. But he was also a radical Muslim who allegedly took part in a terror plot to blow up nightclubs and a shopping centre. Today, Omar Khayyam took the stand at the Old Bailey. He denies charges that he and 6 others planned a series of attacks on targets across Britain. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford reports.
This was Omar Khayyam 2 weeks before his arrest in 2004. Recorded on CCTV inspecting more than half a ton of fertiliser, an ingredient for explosives. It was being kept at a storage depot in West London. Omar Khayyam's accused, along with 6 others, of conspiring to bomb targets in southern England. Today, on the 84th day of the trial, he gave evidence for the first time. He was asked by his barrister to describe his reaction to the 9/11 attacks on America. He said he had mixed feelings as so many people died. But from the witness box in Court 8 at the Old Bailey, he said, "I was happy because America was and is the greatest enemy of Islam, and they put up puppet regimes and dictatorships to secure their interests in the Middle East." He told the court he grew up in Crawley, went to the local school and captained the cricket team. In the year 2000, at the age of 17, he ran away from home and headed to Pakistan to train with the Mujahideen. He says he was taught everything he needed for guerrilla warfare in Kashmir, how to use AK-47s and sniper rifles, and reconnaissance techniques. His worried family tracked him down and brought him back to Crawley, where he said he was welcomed with flowers. Omar Khayyam's barrister, Joel Benathan, asked him about a trip to Afghanistan the next year. "Did you meet people who were members of the Taliban?" "Yes," Omar Khayyam replied. "They're amazing people. They are soft, kind and humble towards the Muslims, but harsh against their enemies." The prosecution claims the Ministry of Sound nightclub in London was a possible target for Khayyam and his alleged co-conspirators, as was the Blue Water shopping centre in Kent and utilities like the gas supply. Omar Khayyam admitted that in the tribal areas of Pakistan in 2003, he met a very senior Mujahideen leader called Abdul Hadi, but said he didn't believe Hadi was a member of Al-Qaeda. Then Omar Khayyam's barrister asked the direct question: "Did he ever authorise or tell you to carry out an attack on the United Kingdom?" "No," was the immediate reply. So far, Omar Khayyam hasn't been asked about the 600 kilograms of fertiliser he visited at the storage depot in West London. In truth, Omar Khayyam's evidence has only just begun. He faces many more days of questioning, not just from his own barrister, but also from the prosecution and from the lawyers defending the other men in the dock. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, at the Old Bailey.
Now, in a separate development, 2 men were charged tonight in connection with an alleged network of terrorist recruiters. They were arrested during a series of raids in London at the start of the month, including one on a Chinese restaurant. Earlier, 6 men detained in the raids appeared in court. 4 have already been remanded in custody. Time may be running out in the race to tackle global warming. Experts say the UK needs to implement radical cuts to carbon emissions within the next 4 years if we're to avoid serious problems in the future. In the latest in our series on climate changing us, Sarah Mukherjee reports now from Manchester on disturbing new research which calls for drastic changes to the way we live.
21st century life is fueled by carbon. Almost everything we do pumps out greenhouse gases at an unsustainable rate. Much of this we know already, but now researchers here in Manchester say we have to slow down our carbon consumption before climate change is irreversible. In many ways, it's very difficult to conceptualise gigatons of carbon or parts per million in the atmosphere. But think about it like one of those mini balances you get from a cash point. This is what the report's authors are calling our carbon balance. We have an allowance of 4.6 gigatons to last us until 2050. But every year we use about 157 megatons, and that's increasing, which means we'll use up our allowance by 2029. In other words, if we had a carbon salary to last us until the end of the month, at this rate, we'd have used it up in 2 weeks. The scientists behind the research say we need to have a plan of action in place within 4 years.
Because we're emitting a lot of carbon dioxide at the moment, but it means that we're running out of time, basically. We need to start making cuts, and substantial cuts, as soon as possible. And the longer we leave that, the more difficult those cuts are going to be to make.
The government's already committed itself to reducing carbon emissions by 60% by 2050, for example, with more public transport. But this report says we need far more action, far faster, and has even shocked environmental activists.
We're talking about needing to cut carbon dioxide emissions by around 70% by 2030. That's a much greater level than been identified before, but importantly we can do it. The solutions are there, what they need is government backing.
And this is an example of one of the solutions we'll need to invest in on one of the Co-op buildings in Manchester. These aren't tiles, they're solar panels, able to provide enough electricity for 55 homes for a year. On top of another building, there's a wind farm. The Co-op has cut carbon emissions by 90%.
So here we are today in one of our call centres, and we've actually done lots of little things which all add to quite a lot. I mean, if we just take one of these desks here, sustainable timber, we've got low energy computer screens, not the old cathode ray things which we're always churning out heat. Add that to the purchase of green electricity and the type of large projects I've talked about, and you can make big dents. You can virtually eradicate your carbon dioxide emissions. It is definitely possible.
To do all this is expensive, and some measures like reducing car use would be deeply unpopular. But the report's authors say that however tough the choice is, we need to make them now if we want to go on living at our current pace.
And Sarah joins me in the studio now. Sarah, that's a fairly stark warning there from your report, but given this 4-year timescale, what realistically can be done?
Well, yes, Darren, it's a very stark warning, and 4 years, you're absolutely right, it's a tough timetable. But just this week on the 10 o'clock news, we've seen reports from all over the world of how climate change is beginning to affect our planet. For example, in Siberia, we can see here the permafrost is beginning to melt, potentially releasing millions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And in Bangladesh, we heard a report that rising sea levels are beginning to affect millions of people every day. And even today, NASA has published pictures from the Arctic ice caps, showing, as we can see here, how they're rapidly disappearing. Now, environmental groups say what we need is real political will, particularly as some of the most effective ways of cutting carbon dioxide emissions, like reducing car and plane use, are vote losers.
Now, many people are saying that technology can perhaps be used to reduce global warming. How far away are we from seeing this technology actually work?
Well, the thing that really frustrates the green groups is, as we've seen from Manchester, a lot of the technologies are available, but they're simply not getting into the mainstream. Now, today, the government announced a £1 billion programme for an Energy Technologies Institute, partially funded by the private sector, which will look at ways of generating electricity more efficiently and using renewable energy more effectively. But if you really want to get it into the mainstream, like with so many things, you need a lot of cash.
All right, Sarah, thank you. Britain's largest insurance group, Aviva, is cutting 4,000 jobs. The company, which owns Norwich Union and the RAC, says it's shedding call centre staff as customers increase their use of the internet. 1,000 jobs are being transferred to India. Hugh Pym has more.
More British office jobs to be moved to India, more redundancies, some of them compulsory. It was depressing news for Norwich Union staff as they arrived at work.
I haven't got a big enough pension to put my feet up, so I'll have to find something else. If there's any jobs left in the country,
I'm out and an Indian's in.
How do you feel about that?
It's the way of the world, isn't it? But there's no smile on my face.
The parent company Aviva blames the impact of the internet. Fewer staff are needed to deal with customers face-to-face or on the phone because more people are buying insurance policies online. One example of this shift by shoppers away from the high street and towards the internet is right here. BSM, the British School of Motoring, owned by Aviva. Increasingly, customers are booking their driving lessons online or on the phone and not at branches like this. So Aviva will close all these outlets. And then there's the trend known as offshoring. Indian workers able to do the same office jobs more cheaply. Aviva simply adding to a pattern which has been seen across the British economy. Over the last 5 years, more than 150,000 jobs have been moved offshore. 950,000 manufacturing jobs have been lost. But the total number of jobs in the economy rose by 1.1 million, with the UK creating more than enough work to compensate for the losses.
What we've been seeing over a long period is some of the lower value-added jobs go through into overseas economies where it's more cost-effective for those jobs to be located. And the jobs which have come through in the UK have been higher value-added and in new industries which are actually generating more revenue in the UK economy.
But unemployment is creeping up and it's not clear whether the economy can continue to create enough new jobs for those who've lost out in the outsourcing revolution. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The Oscar-winning actor and director George Clooney has appealed to the UN Security Council to take immediate action to end the crisis in the Darfur region of Sudan. Mr. Clooney visited the region last April and he's become an active campaigner to bring an end to the violence in Darfur. He said action was needed to avoid a humanitarian disaster.
My job is to come here today and to beg you on behalf of the millions of people who will die, and make no mistake, they will die, for you to take real and effective measures to put an end to this. Of course, it's complex, but when you see entire villages raped and killed, wells poisoned and then filled with the bodies of its villagers, then all complexities disappear, and it comes down to simply right and wrong.
Well, our World Affairs correspondent Mike Wooldridge is at the UN tonight in New York. Mike, why is there this interest now in Darfur?
Because the situation is getting worse, because the violence is increasing once again, and because it is getting harder once again to get access for humanitarian assistance. Also because the United Nations Security Council has set a deadline of September the 30th for Sudan to agree to let in up to 20,000 UN peacekeepers and police, which the UN says are needed. Sudan, though, is saying no. Its president today said this was simply an attempt to recolonize his country.
And we heard George Clooney talking there. Will celebrities like him make a difference, do you think?
Well, I think that what he's trying to do here is essentially to shame the UN into more action and Sudan into agreeing to let in this United Nations force. What George Clooney says is that at least Hollywood can get the cameras turning. And of course, he used language to go with that, talking about this being the first genocide of the 21st century, warning the Security Council that it was a genocide on their watch. Just 2 weeks to see whether this works.
Mike, thank you. Coming up on tonight's programme, a leading human rights group accuses Hezbollah of war crimes. Tougher action needs to be taken to cut drinking, smoking and drug use among the young. That's according to a new report. The Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs says teaching in schools on the issue has had little effect and has called for measures such as increasing tax on alcohol and raising the legal smoking age. Well, Margaret Gilmore is with me now with more details. Margaret?
Darren, this is pretty shocking stuff. The report reveals the full extent of drugs use amongst young people, and it includes alcohol and tobacco in that. There are 7 million 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK, and of them 1 million have used an illegal drug in the past month. Nearly 30% drink more than twice the recommended daily alcohol limit at least once a week, and almost a third smoke daily. Well, to try and find out why, I spent this afternoon with a group of students.
I always try and keep my alcohol intake to a minimum and just make sure that I'm still aware of what I'm doing and I can get home safely.
You never get drunk?
Well, I get drunk occasionally, but I always make sure I've got a good friend to carry me home at the end of the night.
4 or 5 pints not excessively, so I end up in the gutter, but a good night out.
Most of the students I met at Roehampton University drank. Some smoked, and some admitted they'd tried drugs. Here they echoed the report's condemnation of drugs education at schools as ineffective.
It's drugs like marijuana and cocaine that are the real sort of killers, in the sense that it's ruining people's lives, their social lives, their families and everything. And I think it's that's the silent killer that we probably weren't educated enough on, I don't think.
There is far too much emphasis on students passing exams, meeting the targets the government sets, rather than actually acquiring life skills.
The report says the government must get much tougher. It recommends an increase in tax on alcohol, raising the legal age of smoking from 16 to 18, lowering the drink-drive limit for under 25s, and a TV ban on advertising alcohol.
They are subjected to massive advertising on TV for alcohol, and they get a sense from other people that cigarettes can help them relax, alcohol can give them a good time. So all the messages that they're getting, apart from these fairly weak ones that are coming maybe from the school, is that drugs are actually something that works.
Tonight, the government ruled out lowering drink-drive limits, but will consider other measures.
We are currently consulting on raising the age for legal tobacco sales from 16 to 18. That consultation ends next month, and we will seriously consider that change thereafter. In respect of drink driving, our key priority is enforcement and tough penalties.
Well, the report says it's still too easy for teenagers to get hold of drink and drugs. Things are worse here than almost anywhere else in Europe, and worse than a decade ago, with alcohol abuse the biggest problem. Darren.
Margaret, thank you. Poland has announced it will send 1,000 troops to Afghanistan. The decision comes after NATO commanders issued a call for 2,500 more troops to fight the Taliban in southern Afghanistan. But the Polish Defence Ministry says the troops will only be deployed in the north and east of the country and won't arrive until February. The Lebanese militant organisation Hezbollah has denied that its members committed war crimes during the recent conflict with Israel. A report by Amnesty International said Hezbollah violated humanitarian law by deliberately firing missiles into civilian areas in northern Israel. Hezbollah said Amnesty's report was unbalanced and lacked credibility. Katia Adler reports now from Beirut.
Katyusha rockets fired from southern Lebanon. Hezbollah launched 4,000 of them during the recent conflict. And this was the result. Israeli homes and lives destroyed. 43 Israeli civilians killed, 7 of them children. Thousands spent a month living in bunkers. Hundreds of thousands fled. Israeli officials and victims of the conflict say Hezbollah meant to kill and maim as many civilians as possible. The northern Israeli town of Nahariya came under repeated attack.
Hezbollah is a terror organization, and by throwing Katyushas to civilians is, of course, not human.
I blame Nasrallah and Hezbollah in war crimes against the civil population of the north of Israel.
Amnesty International says this means Hezbollah is clearly guilty of war crimes.
The Geneva Conventions are very clear about this and what constitutes a war crime. Deliberately targeting civilians is a war crime, and indiscriminate attacks that mean that civilians get caught up are also war crimes, and we saw that happening in this particular situation.
Hezbollah, though, has angrily rejected Amnesty's report. We've come to the southern suburbs of Beirut, dominated by the group, and members of Hezbollah have told us we targeted Israeli civilians because they targeted our civilians first. The Israelis virtually decimated these neighborhoods of the Lebanese capital because they said they were Hezbollah strongholds, but families lived here too.
More than 80% of the victims in Israel are soldiers. More than 80% of the victims in Lebanon, or Lebanon's victims, are civilian.
The conflict over Israeli troops are leaving southern Lebanon. Amnesty International has accused them of war crimes too. It's called on the United Nations to bring guilty individuals on both sides to justice. Katia Adler, BBC News, Beirut.
Last week's confirmation by Tony Blair that he'll leave office in the next 12 months is causing particular interest in Scotland. There, some think the timing of his departure could have a significant effect on Scottish parliamentary elections next May, with the Scottish National Party the biggest threat to Labour. From Edinburgh, Brian Taylor has this assessment.
Can I say one thing first, Presiding Officer? Unlike Miss Sturgeon, I don't take my orders from a leader in London.
Head-to-head at Holyrood, Labour and the SNP. For decades, the core fault line in Scottish politics. And for decades, Scottish Labour has contained the challenge. Now they have to do it again, fearful that the battle over Tony Blair's succession could drag them down.
Prime Minister, why won't you set a timetable to go?
Here in the Scottish Parliamentary Chamber at Holyrood, there are 129 seats up for grabs next May. Labour is defending 50 of them, but they only hold power through a coalition with the 17 Liberal Democrats, and together, they have a tiny majority of just 5. Nationalist MSPs believe Scots are finally fed up with Labour, but Alex Salmond, their king over the water, seeking to return from Westminster, also believes Scots want more power.
Nobody wants a puppet assembly. They want a genuine parliament, equal and with proper independent status in the world. So I think what's changed is we've tried devolution, we've found it inadequate, and we're looking for something better.
This is Dundee. The seats here are knife-edge Labour SNP marginals. Some back independence.
Our own parliament would make our own decisions instead of people down south thinking they know what's better for around the areas up here.
But there are still doubts and fears.
I don't think Scotland could stand on its own 2 feet.
I am proud of the Great Britain we have built together over the last 300 years.
When Gordon Brown stresses British identity, he's stating his claim to govern the UK as a Scot, but also countering the nationalist challenge. Scotland's Labour First Minister wants to focus squarely on that fight in Scotland, not the party leadership.
It has to be an election about Scotland, and it has to be a clear choice in the SNP's plans to take us to the brink of independence, or using the powers of the Parliament to ensure that young people in Scotland have the best possible start in life.
Even if the SNP gain more seats, could they find a coalition partner?
The scale of the exercise is phenomenal.
Liberal Democrats currently sit alongside Labour in the Scottish Cabinet. They could switch to the Nationalists, but are put off by the SNP demand for an independence referendum. The Tories, their Scottish leader Annabel Goldie says she'd work with Labour to stop the SNP. Labour red, Lib Dem yellow. Could the Greens complete a traffic light coalition, or would they work with the SNP? For Labour, here at the Scottish Parliament, a quandary. They need to play down their own leadership problems at Westminster, and yet to contain the SNP they need to talk up the value of Scotland's links with London. A hideous dilemma to be resolved one way or the other when politicians here face the voters next May. Brian Taylor, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Now, is he a genius or is he a vandal? Banksy, the so-called guerrilla artist whose work raises eyebrows and temperatures in equal measure, has opened his latest exhibition in the United States. He's famous for adapting existing art to make acute social comment. This time, Banksy, whose real identity remains a mystery, goes a step further. From Los Angeles, here's John Kay.
Painting walls isn't enough for Banksy anymore. A graffitied elephant, the star of this American show. Not even LA has seen anything like this before. Inside, some of the classic street art, which has made him famous all over the world. Famous and yet unknown. All we know is that Banksy comes from Bristol. We don't know if this is him, or this, or this. And America loves the mystery man with a political message.
I think LA will get the joke, will understand. I think, you know, the nice thing, the clever thing about Banksy's work is it's very simple and approachable, yet profound.
America's foreign policy is savaged in spray paint. The camouflaged elephant that blends in with the wallpaper is supposed to represent big world issues like poverty that we fail to notice. But much of this Tinseltown exhibition deals with the cult of celebrity. There's a grotesque parody of a pregnant Britney Spears. CDs by the it girl Paris Hilton are defaced and left for cockroaches.
But his criticism of the Hollywood establishment doesn't seem to have put off the Hollywood establishment.
Over the next few days, some of the industry's biggest stars are expected to come down to this disused warehouse in a dangerous part of LA. His work can now be seen all over the city, but not everyone appreciates his efforts.
Vandalism, straight up vandalism.
Neighbourhood groups fear Banksy may now inspire other street artists to spray away, and they might be right to worry.
He is actually my favourite artist, and what I love about Banksy is that he actually thinks about the message that he's putting out to the public.
Earlier this week, Banksy put an effigy of a Guantanamo Bay prisoner inside Disneyland, and his people promise more of the same, from the guerrilla artist who likes to shock, but who hides his face so he doesn't get caught. John Kay, BBC News, Los Angeles.
The works of Banksy there. Now, the latest edition of the Best of the 10 podcast is now available. This week's menu includes a look at the technology used to track terrorist suspects and the remarkable new evidence of how global warming is changing Siberia. To have a look, you can go to bbc.co.uk/newspodcasts. That's bbc.co.uk/newspodcasts. And remember, you don't need a special video player. You can just view it on your computer. Now, the 10 o'clock news hour continues on BBC News 24 with a live interview with the Hollywood actor George Clooney as he urges the UN to end the crisis in Darfur. And on BBC One, I'll be back with the headlines after we've joined our news teams where you are. Bye for now.
Hello, good evening. The video footage of two Welsh schoolgirls fighting, which was broadcast on the internet, has caused outrage and led to calls for the website to be banned. Filming violent attacks is becoming more common, and it's prompted the Education Minister, Jane Davidson, to write to the Home Office to ask for better monitoring of websites. The video of the pupils from Llanishen High School in Cardiff has now been taken off the YouTube website. We've decided to show only still images.
Two teenage girls and a vicious fight. Their friends looking on. All of this was filmed on a mobile phone. These graphic pictures were then posted onto the YouTube website. The fight ends only when one of the two girls is left bleeding. The teenagers are pupils at Llanishen High School in Cardiff. The fight was reported to South Wales Police, and it's emerged that one of the girls has received a formal reprimand. That's the equivalent of a police caution for the under-18s. Neither girl has been excluded from school, and it's not known who posted the clip onto the internet.
We don't need this sort of site that encourages children, and certainly not have a section of the site that says school fights. It's totally irresponsible.
Well, this is the website in question, and as I've been researching this story today, I have found literally hundreds of video clips involving fights, including this one you can see here, which is said to be from another Welsh school. David Bright is the head teacher of Llantarnam Comprehensive School near Cwmbran. It was his pupils who featured in the clip we discovered. It was filmed a year ago.
I'm appalled, really. The fact that children will fight, I think, is an unfortunate fact of school life and young person's life. But the fact that it would be extended in this way really does worry me greatly.
These pictures have now been removed from the website, but as we've discovered, many more clips involving fights are freely available at the touch of a button.
The jury in the trial of a couple accused of killing a woman from Flintshire has been visiting the scene of the murder. The body of Lorraine Jones from Leeswood near Mold was found by the roadside near Trawsfynydd in June last year. Christopher Reid and Catherine Williams initially denied any involvement, but have since blamed each other. Help is on the way for thousands of businesses who've been complaining about their rates. The Welsh Assembly Government has announced a new scheme to halve the amount that smaller businesses have to pay. Post offices have come out best. Some won't have to pay any rates at all.
They've been an endangered species. Nearly 300 post offices have closed in Wales in 6 years. Welsh rural post offices are particularly vulnerable, serving smaller populations. But many regard them as vital, and today's changes aim to help them survive. It's proposed many post offices won't have to pay business rates at all, and the rest only half what they pay now.
I'll save over £700 a year here, which will go a long way to maintaining the post office service here.
Other businesses will benefit too. Rural areas already have a rate relief scheme which helped them over the foot and mouth crisis 4 years ago. Now that scheme is to be expanded to cover all areas of Wales. Places like Ystrad Gunlais, where businesses have been under real pressure. Brian Davis's shop didn't qualify under the old scheme, but under the new one, he'll see his rates reduced.
This is welcome news from the Assembly. Long overdue, I feel.
Businesses with a rateable value of less than £5,000 will get sizable reductions in their rates. But those above this threshold will get nothing, and that was criticised by some today. It explains how the scheme can be expanded to the rest of Wales, but not cost the Welsh Assembly Government any more. The money will be spread more thinly, in other words.
What we shouldn't do is really build this up into some great business rates giveaway or something, because it certainly isn't. Your average small business person will be lucky to get £100, £200 out of this scheme per year.
If all goes to plan, the proposals will come into effect in April next year.
The Advertising Standards Authority has upheld a complaint made against Tesco in Bangor. The shop described its products as local, but none actually came from the immediate area. Tesco says all the products advertised did come from Wales. The number of people going to church in Wales has dropped by almost a fifth in the last 5 years. 6 years ago, nearly 220,000 people regularly attended Sunday worship. But figures from the church in Wales show that fewer than 180,000 people now regularly go to services. The findings are backed up by the closure this weekend of one of Cardiff's most prominent places of worship. Rail services between South Wales and Paddington continue to be disrupted tonight. A number of trains were cancelled earlier and services are still subject to long delays tonight. First Great Western hopes to have services running normally by morning, but is advising passengers to call National Rail Inquiries for the latest information. The weather forecast for Wales now. Here's Derek Brockway.
Well, today's rain has now cleared away, leaving a dry and cooler night, and tomorrow is looking much better. Now, it may start off a bit cloudy and misty in places, but it'll soon brighten up. Many parts of the country then enjoying good spells of sunshine, and it will stay dry. Feeling fresher tomorrow, but still pleasant in the sunshine. Top temperatures 21 Celsius, 70 Fahrenheit, with light winds.
It's the chance of a lifetime to star in a West End show, and this weekend Connie Fisher from Pembrokeshire will find out if she's made it. She's in the final of the BBC search to find a Maria for Andrew Lloyd Webber's new production of The Sound of Music. Tomorrow we'll catch up with her supporters as they prepare for her big moment. There's news and sport on BBC Radio Wales and BBC Radio Cymru from 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Claire Summers is back in breakfast from 6:25. That's Wales Today from me. Good night.
A reminder of tonight's main news. A man accused of planning a terror plot in Britain has told the Old Bailey he was happy when Al-Qaeda attacked America on September the 11th. Newsnight is starting on BBC Two now, but from all of us on the 10 o'clock team, good night.
Good evening. It's been all go today weather-wise. We've had violent thunderstorms, gusty winds, some hail, some tornadoes across parts of northern England. You name it, we've had it across the UK. But are things settling down over the next few days? Certainly tomorrow, after a grey start, things should brighten up quite nicely with some sunshine for many places. Clearer skies do lie in wait out in the Atlantic, gradually edging towards us. I'm not promising wall-to-wall sunshine over the next few days, but a lot of dry weather, and that does include the weekend. But at the moment, as you can see, we've still got a fair amount of cloud, thickest across Scotland, where it's still pouring with rain across the Highlands in particular. The worst of the heavy rain should ease off, but a damp end to the night here, and later on in the night we could see some light rain just returning to some southern counties of England, but most places will have a dry start to Friday. Dawning quite chilly though across the west, Northern Ireland down to 6 or 7 degrees, rather milder, more humid further east, and still damp across the far northeast of mainland Scotland, gradually That rain easing away northwards. Most of Scotland starting off dry and bright, but quite chilly under the clear skies across southwest Scotland, 7, 8 or 9 degrees. Northern England starting rather cloudy, and towards the North Sea coast it might stay rather grey for much of the day, but despite a rather cloudy and disappointing start to the day for much of East Anglia and the southeast, still with the odd spot of rain, things should pick up, I think, through the day. Certainly a bright start for the West Country, Devon and Cornwall, lots of sunshine first thing. Quite a fresh start to the day, 10 or 11 degrees, so a cool feel, but it will warm up, as it will for Wales. Lovely day to come here. And for Northern Ireland, you had a fine afternoon, and tomorrow promises plenty more sunshine too after that chilly start. So through the day, gradually that rain does clear away from the northeast mainland, but it hangs on across the northern Isles of Scotland. That dampness across southern counties of England should clear. So most places dry and brightening up through the day. So a decent end to the working week, away that is from those North Sea coasts where it might stay a little bit grey. But in the brightness, not feeling too bad. High teens, low 20s, 22 degrees in London. There will be a bit of a breeze across some southern counties, and that breeze will bring cloud back in across many central and eastern parts of England for a time on Saturday. But the clouds should start to break up, some sunshine arriving. The best of that, again, probably out west. By Sunday, subtle change, a weather front pushing in from the west, freshening breeze and some outbreaks of rain across western parts of the UK, but plenty of sunshine further east, and again, in the brightness, should feel very pleasant indeed. Much more information, of course, on our website. That's it from me. Good night.